Welcome all to the February 19th Water Use Resource Management meeting. That was a great presentation and approval of the January 15th meeting minutes.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Public comment on the agenda? Nothing. Moving on to old business. Upper Delaware Roundtable, January 17th meeting update. Travis?
Yep, I attended that meeting on the 17th. Jennifer Grossman basically facilitated the meeting. She's a private consultant for the Natural Resources Defense Council. And it was an agricultural theme. The discussion was touching on a lot of the issues facing today's farmers in our region. I'm going to kind of breeze through here because agriculture is not really our thing here. But she touched on creating a brand name for our food shed here, the Catskill region. Came out that there's a lot of issues facing today's dairy industry, funding, loans, workforce, and the whole co-op that's affecting the dairy prices. Farmers really don't have a say in what they get. What they get is what they get. There was talk about a farm camp, possibility for a farm camp to work on educating today's youth in agriculture and creating a new paradigm. And Wayne County has this thing called a full wagon, I believe, where they have local produce. It's like a mobile grocery store, if I got that correct. And then there was talk about creating the Narrowsburg School into a commercial kitchen or an agro hall. Try to develop that to almost create a creamery, something to boost agriculture in the area. And that was the theme for that roundtable.
And you want a free yogurt.
And I want a free yogurt. Good. Lori Stewart made.
Thank you. Moving on to Delaware Hudson Transportation Heritage Council meeting of January 23rd.
I attended that meeting. It took place at the Port Jervis Youth Center. And as you know, the D&H Transportation Heritage Council meets quarterly. So I'll just offer you a few highlights. There is a series of videos being produced to raise awareness about the D&H Canal on the Gravity Railroad. The status of it is that they would like to do filming of the most attractive features along the canal route in the spring and the fall so that the vegetative overgrowth is less on the various trails. And they're attempting now to coordinate the locations for that filming from west to east. So that would be from Carbondale, Pennsylvania to Eddyville, New York. They're looking for the most visually appealing features of each section, and then have also obtained a number of historic photos of the canal back in its heyday that they'd like to return to those exact sites and see in modern day what it looks like. And this will be basically a documentary in the style of Ken Burns, essentially, to go in and out of the historic and the modern looks of the canal. Also discussed was the Lackawaxen and Upper Delaware Greenway proposal that we had heard about previously at our committee. They basically are discussing that because it's a Department of Conservation and Natural Resources grant project, and they simply want to make sure that the organizers are aware of the presence and the importance of canal remnants very significantly in that Lackawaxen area. So they'll be paying attention to when those meetings take place so that people from the council can attend and specify that they would certainly like the canal remembered in any projects that go forward. Individual memberships are now being accepted in the D&H Transportation Heritage Council. There would be dues of $20 to become a non-voting member. And essentially it's a friends group that would just express support for the preservation and awareness raising for the canal and the Gravity Railroad. So if anybody's interested in that, I happen to have an in with the secretary since she is me. So we do have forms available if you'd like to participate in that way. The majority of the meeting on the 23rd was about goal setting. There was a desire to put some interim and short-term and long-term goals into effect, given that this was the first meeting of 2013. And some of them I'll mention among the goals were certainly a long-term project is to develop a comprehensive D&H trail from end to end. And of course, that won't be possible in a lot of respects because it's literally paved over in some sections or de-watered or just doesn't exist anymore. But in the areas where it's possible and not on private property, that is certainly something that has always been a long-term interest of the council. A short-term goal is increasing the membership roster because with additional members comes clout and to advocate on behalf of the canal. There was talk of exploring the idea of creating a map from Google Earth in which the D&H Canal and Gravity Railroad corridor would be shown with the property lines that currently exist superimposed on it, so that then this trail system could be discussed to get permission from the various property owners if they're interested in becoming a part of this trail system. That would be a long-range project. A few others are the development of a phone app for the Gravity Railroad and Canal route to basically tell you what you're looking at and what areas are within reach for trail systems, to having meetings with certain organizations such as the Lackawaxen River Conservancy, the Delaware Highlands Conservancy, and the Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority, so that the council can reach out to those organizations and inform them about the trail prospects and get some buy-in and cooperation potentially. New York State has a program going on now, which is an initiative of Governor Cuomo called New York State Path into History. So the D&H would like to raise its profile by being included in that initiative. And there was also discussion of initiating a program. There are a lot of people that own these former canal houses, that were lock tenders' homes in the past, and they've renovated them. We tend to think that a lot of those people would be interested in highlighting their homes and what they've done for the historic features, and basically putting together perhaps a tour someday of these canal era lock houses. So that's something that they were working on. They had the usual announcement of member accomplishments and concerns and upcoming events by the participants of the council. And the next meeting will take place on Wednesday, April 24th, and the tentative location was the National Park Service's district office in Berryville at the Corwin Farm property. And there would be a morning field trip to visit 2 canal locks that are existing in the Berryville area on Tut Hill Road, and followed by lunch, of course, because the group always seems to manage to involve a meal in every meeting. So that's the conclusion of that report.
Thank you very much. Moving on, there's a handout from the Common Waters February 7th partnership meeting summary right here that we all have.
Please read that at your leisure. Both Travis and Don Hamilton, as well as myself, were present for that. It was a long meeting and a lot of topics covered, so we would encourage you to read through that at your leisure. And if you have any questions, please let us know. That group meets again on April 11th. Location to be determined.
Okay, moving on to the National Park Service, Marcellus Shale, February 11th, 13th conference call report. Again, there's a handout for everybody.
Yep, this is the current 9B regulations, which regulate the drilling under national park units. And this conference call was really geared towards our area and how they're trying to, these regulations are from 1979, so they're trying to overhaul them to incorporate our area and new modern changes, and try to keep the drilling outside of the park units, but still allow the drilling underneath the unit. A big question came up with the boundary line, and where exactly is the boundary line for the corridor, and how they would regulate it without not knowing where that line is on the ground. And Don and I talked about this. Don sat in on the call too. And I found it to be, and it's going to be an issue at some point, if it isn't already, yes.
Yeah, I would say it's an issue because 36 CFR, the river management plan does not apply to privately owned property.
Right.
So that would be a big issue regardless of where the boundary is, because the boundary is all on private property.
Right.
And the Park Service obviously recognizes that, so dealing with this area in the upper Delaware is a challenge that they haven't faced in other areas. They're
Right.
going to have to really tailor any regulations to our unique circumstances.
That's why, you know, this thing, you know, that's why I asked that
Yeah.
at one meeting, where did these come from, what was 9B, and, yeah, I'm glad that somebody's following up with it, because we've got to look at the river management plan for guidance when it comes to these.
Right, as you can see, under the current regulations, 9B is not triggered if, in effect, it is all private land, if no federal land is crossed. So, as they are now, there would be no regulation in most of the corridor because it is privately owned, regardless of the boundary line. But we'll still have to wait to see what they come up with their draft regulations, which are due by the end of this year when they complete their EIS.
Any other questions on this topic? Other, under old business. Okay, we'll move on to new business. 6A, New York State Partnership Regional Invasive Species Management, PRISM, January 30th, 13th call report. Again, got a handout on this right here.
Yep, I sat in on this teleconference call, webinar call, initiated by the New York State PRISM. And it was all about invasive worms. The handout you have is an interview of this lady, Cindy Hall. She led the webinar, and essentially everything she went over. And it's interesting, she's out of the University of Minnesota. Essentially, she said there's about 7 to 9 different species of invasive worms. And she admitted that most people think she's nuts, but that because we all view worms as beneficial to gardens and everything, but when they can get into a hardwood forest where they're not native, they can essentially eat the entire horizon there, and it doesn't really make it conducive for natural vegetation, the native vegetation. And her take-home message from this was to basically, when you're done fishing with your worms, to throw them in the garbage rather than dump them out on the ground. And I think we're going to see this coming to our area too. Stickers and decals throwing worms out if you haven't already.
Fishermen use those worms out there, you gotta be careful.
Andy and I haven't used worms since we were 6 years old.
It even includes rubber ones.
And even then, our hooks were barbless.
How do you tell native worms from non-native worms?
We have to
Listen
call
to their
Cindy out.
accent.
From what I gathered from this teleconference, there are no native worms in our forest ecosystems.
Where'd they come from?
Well, my friend has a mulch pile and the worms are in there. And I don't know how they got there, but everything is surrounded by upland forest stuff.
I had a bit of an issue with this because our native species, American woodcock, feeds almost exclusively on earthworms.
That's all I could think of.
So-
Great woodcock shoot.
You can't eat them. Things just eat worms, right? Can't get that out of your mind.
It's the
No, but
circle of life.
so I researched a little bit. We do have a native earthworm that, if you have ever dug around by a wetlander, it's like a little tiny, squiggly, red-looking worm. Not our massive night crawler that we all can picture right now that cover the sidewalks whenever it's raining. And years ago, I'm sure that those night crawlers didn't come out and scattered driveways when, it poured like that. It's new to me, I've seen it in my lifetime, where, wow, there's thousands of worms right now, I don't know why they're all out, and it wasn't like that when I was a kid.
Maybe you're only 20 years old.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that.
27.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe you've seen it too.
Yeah.
But then again, she has a rapid assessment tool, how to assess the ecosystems and see if the earthworms are there, present. But all she wanted people to take home was to not distribute the worms you bought, or compost worms that maybe you bought for vermicompost. Do not put them on the ground.
So maybe the worms from where fishermen get them could be from who knows where, they probably ship them in by tractor trailer somewhere.
That's right.
Okay. Out of
So
state
now
worms.
this worm committee
Out of
can
state
be
worms.
interested in worms.
As the
Put
worm
it on our
report-
agenda.
Ah, very good.
Let's have a charrette.
A charrette on
Well,
worms.
next one, bumper sticker, and a t-shirt. Okay, Model Forest Policy Program, the MFPP, February 12th conference call report. Again, another handout.
Right. This is something that Susan Beecher and the former director for Pike County Conservation District and Stephanie Dahlk from the Pinchot Institute invited me on at the last Common Waters meeting. And essentially, you can see there in your handout the 5 groups that are attending this university. It's been in place since 2010, I believe. And the university is basically a group of support group that can help you and reach whatever objectives you want for your river basin. And the goals for the Upper Delaware River Basin through this program are to focus on building robust communications throughout the region and establishing good scientific data resources. There's going to be more webinars. There's twice a month, every other week, and this was my first one, and they said that they'll basically get into the more nuts and bolts of the program next week, next Tuesday. So there'll be more to follow there too.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the, let's see. Delaware River Flow and Storage Data Report. You've got a handout from the DRBC right here. I made some very quick notes since this is sometimes a couple days old. So right now, Cannonsville's at 88.4%. Capacton is at 86.5%. What does that mean? It means that the total New York storage right now is 88.6. Normal for this time is 82, so we're about 6.6% above where we should be. And let me see, as far as precipitation, about where we should be. December and January, we had about 6 inches. Historically, it's about 6.5 inches. One other thing, hopefully you've got all that snowpack information from the DEP. The next survey will be tomorrow, February 20th, but there's really not much snow. Cannonsville, this was about 5 days ago, was about a little less than half a foot, which equates into 3.3 billion gallons. Historically, it's about 13.5 billion gallons. Capacton, a little less also than half a foot. And usually they've got 2.4 billion, or they have 2.4 billion, and usually it's historically 9.6 billion. So half a foot of snow right now, and that was about 4 or 5 days ago. That'll probably now decrease because we had some rain today. What else?
Just on this, if you remember the slide that Peter had, where when you're up here,
L2.
you're L2, and you can release and do these thermal stress release without impacting the system. We're definitely there. This is even higher above the long-term medium than it was in 2012.
Right, my concern that I asked him was that hopefully that stays above there in June, July, and August. You know, that's when we need cold
that's
water, right?
Typically, it's where it kind of peaks and matches, but it's been
Right.
very good for the last several years.
I agree. He was very, very clear on that. And what, 88% for Cannonsville and 86 for Pacton. There's no question it's probably going to will spill this year because we still have to get through March and April, which is usually wet. So, let's see what else we've got. March 19th, Water Use Resource Management presentation, Pennsylvania Community Conservation. That's going to be our next presentation here next month, and that's the Pennsylvania Community Conservation Partnership Program grants.
It'll be from the Pennsylvania DCNR. It'll be Dennis Demara and Lauren Passenger from his office doing a mini workshop on this grants program, which he has advised that he believes the UDC could be eligible under a partnership grant to participate in. So we are interested, and the deadline for applications is April 10th for that program. So the timing will be good, and we'll certainly publicize it, particularly to all our Pennsylvania Township members.
Great, thank you. And new business under other.
I do have,
two others.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Apropos of our presentation tonight, I was playing with some of the language and words relative to the thermal stress relief program, and I'd like to introduce a resolution to the worm group. Which worm? Water use worm. The water use worm. To initiate a movement of support out of the council that I think it's incumbent upon the Water Use Committee, because that's what we're talking about here, is trying to improve the habitat for the fish in the Hancock to Lordsville neighborhood. I got a little technical help from Travis during the past week or last week, and I lifted in this, just so that you can see it, we lifted directly from the river management plan the italicized language in whereas number 1 and whereas number 2. That comes directly from the river management plan. So when they say it's our mission to, on some occasions, especially during drought, variable flows associated with rapid temperature fluctuations adversely affecting aquatic ecosystems, we're supposed to be, what's our plan? And this is being handed to us an improvement or a solution. So with those two paragraphs, and in the third paragraph, I tried to define my conversations in advance with Peter and Dan Plummer. What is this Lordville Thermal Stress Relief Protocol? What it's about? It's proposed, I'm saying here in this thing, that it was vetted at our meeting, discussed, explained, and it includes predictions of water temperatures on the main stem based upon I'm just repeating what Professor Colso said, weather service forecast, local air temperature, river flow, so and so. It's designed to allow the managers of the dams at Cannonsville and Surfactant to release waters with maximum efficiency to mitigate stress on the fisheries without interfering with the water supply system to other Delaware River stakeholders, basically a win-win situation. Then we have the stakeholders that have already signed on to this, including all the TUs and FUTTR people and Federation of Fly Fishers. And I've added tonight, just with some conversation here, that up to this point we've had no negative or adverse comment. And then, so now what am I asking? The resolution is resolution supports to express support of the proposal, urge the decree parties to the 1954 Supreme Court decision regarding the Delaware, that's of course the compact states and this New York City, to adopt it, and the WORM does recommend and urge that our full council adopt a similar resolution at its March 7th meeting. So this would be sort of the template or guideline that we could present to our colleagues. And we would encourage our colleagues, if we're going to have the opportunity to see a video of this, either online or YouTube or something like that, that would be helpful. And if we could get the PowerPoint presentation, which has much more technical information than understand and comprehend, but you can read it to your heart's content and study it. And I have every confidence that our scientists are better than their scientists. Our mathematicians are world-class. Just like we have a world-class fishery, these Jim and Peter are world-class in this field of water use to maximum, the maximum efficiency. So we get a resolution from our full committee, we pass it on, and what we're asking for, what? We're asking for the same thing that Jim and Peter asked for. Pilot program, study it, learn from it, and see if we can improve the river. Okay, so that's the nature of the motion.
I had a question, I'm gonna ask Jim, because I had a question, and I should have asked it during the presentation. If you had a pie, how much water is gonna come out from, because it says in this resolution, Pepacton is also featured. But if you had a pie, how much percentage-wise would this additional water come from Cannonsville versus Pepacton, would you say?
It's probably gonna be close to 100%
From Cannonsville?
from Cannonsville.
Okay,
For two reasons. New York City is less apt to use Pepacton water to come down the river. They preserve that to use to divert.
right.
And also, that works to the benefit of what we wanna do because Cannonsville water is more effective at temperature mitigation.
Okay.
You moved that, right?
So if I may, I'd like to make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay.
So maybe we should take Pepacton out of there.
Well, the request is that you don't know what the dynamics will be in any given year, and I think Pepacton has to stay as an option, although Cannonsville will almost exclusively be used.
Yeah, I mean, there have been times when Cannonsville was close to depleted and they used Pepacton water. So, but it's still under normal circumstances, it's gonna come from Cannonsville.
Or when it was so green that when they released it,
Right.
remember those days, it was like pea soup?
That happens.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
That still
that
does.
was actually when Cannonsville had used up all of its cold water,
Yeah.
and so it was starting to release warm water.
But a lot of that time, that happens a lot. A lot of times when the reservoir, when Cannonsville's under 60% or even 50%, it starts getting, pretty murky, doesn't it, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly due because there's some debate about what's happening. And my personal feeling is that it's actually, you've released so much of the cold water, you've reached now the thermocline where the water temperature's changing. And at the thermocline is where you get all this, everything gets settled down into the reservoir. Plus now the reservoir is maybe half full and you get a rainstorm. So the exposed bottom of the reservoir is just mud and so you get rainstorm that washes even more sediment into the system.
Right.
So, it's hard to say what's happening exactly, but it seems to be, if you've used up the nice clear cold water underneath the thermocline, that's when it starts to get muddy.
Right.
It tends to be at between 30 and 60%, just depends on how much it could be at 100%. Reservoir could still be at 100%, like in 2006 when we had so much rain and it flooded and spilled in July, but they released so much water, the cold water was all gone, but the reservoir was still full of warm water. So,
All right, so we have discussion, a motion that's been seconded, discussion. Okay, but your question was answered as far as.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, could we read back the motion, please?
Well, the motion is written as before us.
To approve the resolution.
To approve the resolution as
This is the
presented.
resolution, it's in writing.
Okay, and Al seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay.
Great,
Thank
okay.
you very much. That's good.
We will, the staff will prepare this in our typical format for the March 7th UDC meeting and send it out in advance for consideration by the full board.
Yes, and the only question is, should there be any further editing? We had a discussion where we added that there's been no negative. I think it's fairly close, other than, except that this will go out over the signature of our chairman. It's a little different format.
Yes, just
Okay,
structural.
that would be fine.
Just two quick things,
Yes.
if I may. One, there was an article, I can't remember where it was, just recently in some newspaper about, once again, the USGS gauges and funding for the gauges being a concern. Anybody heard any more about
It seems to
that?
involve the Susquehanna River Basin. I saw the same article and we've had that concern raised in previous years and then found out that it didn't apply to the Delaware system. Jim, are you familiar with
Well,
that?
what about the failing gauges, you know?
There have been some gauges on the Delaware system that have been discontinued.
Yeah.
I was just curious, because the article I read didn't specify Susquehanna or Delaware, and I was just curious, you know, maybe Don or somebody might have heard, because I know that was a concern. The last time they said they were gonna take some offline, we had to get in touch with, you know, New York State
I
Administrative.
haven't seen a list of proposed gauges that might be closed, but we could probably find out from USGS.
It's online.
But
When you go, if you go to one of the gauges, like Stylesville or Hale-Eddy, there's a little sidebar that says, here's the gauges in the system that are at risk.
And some of them are on West Branch, right?
Well, no, not on the West Branch, I don't think there are.
Are there any in the Delaware system that are at risk?
You know, I can't remember.
Okay.
What about though, isn't it important to know like what's going on in a major tributary like the Beaver Kill? There was a gauge at Cook's Fall, and it's just gone. Like having that information, doesn't that all add to your understanding
Yes.
of the interaction of?
Particularly since the two admirals just gave that presentation,
Right.
and part of it was all the information on the thermal stress. I mean, how are you gonna know what's going on there, other than if fish are floating or somebody puts their fingers in it, you know? So I was just curious.
Don, am I correct, the Beaver Kill gauge has been out now for what, 2 years?
Cook's Falls?
Yeah, 2 or 3 years?
At
The
least,
temperature.
Temperature, not the level.
The
but
flow is still.
Right, the flow's there, but not temperature.
I believe so, yeah.
is it, you know, I'm totally uninformed and naive about it. Is it so expensive to maintain a gauge? Why would it be?
I've actually looked into this in the last few months. The USGS claims, and Don, you probably know even better, what that their carrying cost, yearly cost to maintain a gauge is $40,000 or $50,000 a year. The equipment's another $60,000 or $70,000 a year. And I've actually looked at private funding to do some of the gauges can be done significantly cheaper than that.
Yeah, USGS doesn't come cheap to manage and maintain those and quality control check them. And a lot of them are shared with other entities like New York City DEP. But there's always some that are proposed to be on the chopping block. And,
Why is it so expensive? Is it the telemetry? Is it getting this whole satellite
Well,
orientated?
Well,
or what?
they do repeat rating curves and discharge measurements for those gauges periodically. If there's been any changes in the river channel due to flow disruption on riverbed there, they will re-gauge that location to get a better, more accurate picture of what the discharge in that cross section is. But USGS has a lot of overhead too.
Like, is it an exact science? Because if you have one gauge at 2 feet, one gauge at 6 feet, which one's the correct location?
Well, they have pretty high standards and they vet all their data before it goes out, and they do charge some high overhead. So.
But aren't we talking about at Lordville, we have a gauge at 2 foot and another gauge
Well,
different?
The gauge at 2 foot, the one I'm talking about at 6 foot is not a discharge measurement. It's just temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, conductivity, turbidity. Their gauge that they have at 2 foot doesn't have a rating curve established to it with it for cubic feet per second discharge based on the river height. And they periodically redo that so they make sure it's accurate.
What that means is they actually come out, they used to come out every 6 weeks and physically measure the depth and flow of the water all the way across the river. And from that, they could say, okay, at this depth, there's 100 CFS flowing. At 2 feet high, there's 500 CFS flowing, and then they would measure. So that way, they can say, okay, here's the depth, it's 2.7 feet, and we've measured that before, and it's a flow of 2,000 CFS. And what Don was saying is if we have a flood, the measurements of depths and flow might change there, and that's why one of the costs associated with it is every 6 weeks, or not so much of, not that often now, but they do still come out and physically measure.
Yeah, depending on what kind of flood events and how much it's rearranged the cross section there, they sometimes need to
Right.
check that in terms of how accurate.
They used to have a manual gauge at Kinkelly,
Manual?
wasn't it? Didn't they have a cable that went across
Yes,
the
they
river?
did, sure they did.
Sure, there is a
Right
Berryville-
before Kinkelly's Rapids. and
Yeah,
that
the
was-
Berryville
right,
gauge,
Right.
that's where the Berryville gauge
Right.
above the Lackawaxen is.
You can see the solar panels
Yeah.
there. Right. But I'm just saying that there used to be a wire, okay, a cable that went across and,
That's right.
you know,
Used to have a little guy.
that's right.
They did.
A
That's,
monkey.
that's why you did.
When there was a
actually
cloudy
have-
day, right. that's
They
right.
actually have these little boats now that are, about 3 feet long by 2 feet wide that have acoustic Doppler technology in them. They can come up with establish a cross-sectional diagram of the riverbed there, the speed of the discharge through that, and estimate a discharge measurement based on that, so they don't have to use those cable crossings the way they used to. But
Very cool.
it's something they have to maintain and update from time to time.
I would like to recommend that either the Park Service or the council, the Worm Committee, contact whomever, DRBC, New York DEP, to get a little bit more information on their proposed hydroelectric project at the Cannonsville. Because it seems Jim's heard various things, we've heard various things, but unless somebody knows what that plan is.
We can get that again, but it was clearly stated in here. Number one, it was not, the turbines would not affect temperature, was what that was alleged in the CEQA and all that. The temperature would not be changed, nor would the quantity or flow or CFS be changed.
That's what Carol Collier said?
That's what I'm talking about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago when this was in the blueprint stage.
Okay, well, it was before my time, and so if you know, that's fine, I think it'd be something to,
Well, I paid very close attention to it because I'm thinking that, does a turbine raise water temperature? I didn't know, so I asked the question, and they say it does not. It's just a pass-through, and there would be no effect in it when you're generating. Oh, we'd like to generate a lot more water. No, it's as the system gives it under its normal operating conditions. That's what's going to be utilized for power
Just
generation.
a matter of capturing that and converting it into electricity.
Capturing it instead of letting it waste.
But like Al says, it would be nice to know, and it
Yeah.
also would be nice to have that in writing in the document. I think there is an opportunity for FERC. I mean, there's an opportunity to get things in writing. Okay, well, it's never gonna change. Well, how do we know it's not gonna change? We could say it's not gonna change if it's in writing and it's in the document that's finally
That's the
finished.
Phil Chase syndrome. When Phil was here, he would always say, oh, this is what the rule was. I remember it was said, he can tell you who said it and what day and all that. But then you lose your corporate memory, the people,
Right.
personnel changes, and I remember asking this question, but I don't have it documented, I think documented, like Al says, is very important.
what could it hurt? If we could find out who's in charge of that, whether it's FERC or DEP.
We actually have requested of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection to have a presentation on that exact topic of the Cannonsville hydroelectric project, and they've agreed to do it. It's just it didn't work out for the March 7th meeting, so they're going to look into our first Thursday full council meetings.
There you go.
Good, there you go.
You don't have to write a letter.
That's right. They're gonna
Ms.
come up to
Murphy
us. Right.
has promised.
It's gonna come from Westchester or Grahamsville, make a
Thank you,
presentation.
Mr. Chairman.
Put it on video.
Good job.
We're doing our best here.
You're on the case. Good
Thank
job.
Thank you.
Facebook.
I have
We should have it.
The executive director has another,
I just wanted to issue a brief reminder that we are accepting nominations for our 25th annual awards ceremony, which is coming up on April 28th. And any possible do-gooding sort of, do-gooding, that was nice, any activity that you can come up with, I'm sure we have a category for. And the nominations are due by March 15th. We do have nomination forms posted on our website, or you can submit it informally any way that you'd like to. We would just like to hear about any organizations, individuals, groups, communities that are doing good works in the Upper Delaware. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just want to mention that the Park Service is going to be co-sponsoring with a number of other organizations a Bio Blitz that's being planned for June 28th and 29th on a piece of property owned by the Norcross Wildlife Foundation. On the PA side of, it borders Shehawken Creek, the West Branch, and the main stem below the confluence. It's a really nice piece of property. It should be very biologically diverse, and we have a number of sponsoring organizations: Delaware Highlands Conservancy, Delaware Riverkeeper Network, Friends of the Upper Delaware River, Northeast PA Audubon, and a number of more participating organizations that are going to help with some of the survey work. And that's coming together nicely, and there'll be some more information sent out on that.
Do you have the location from Shehawken to, is it down to the confluence? Where exactly are we talking?
It's basically from 191, following the downriver side of Shehawken Creek, the West Branch below that, and the West Branch, and then the main stem, the confluence below the.
That's some of the greatest territory in the world. Beautiful there.
Yeah, it has a lot of
down
nice.
Junction Pool.
Yep.
Okay.
And there's a little back channel inlet there that's kind of a pond-like area.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And some nice wetlands connected with the river. And
Frogs in there, that's all there
There's some earthworms to get.
are. Frogs.
Be careful.
Oh, yeah.
Backwat,
Man,
backwat.
earthworms.
So,
So will you have it on your website?
yeah, there'll be some press releases put out on this. It's
And the date is?
June 28th and 29th. The
Okay.
public will be invited in the second day to see what some of the results are, what's been found, and so it's progressing nicely. And it's a nice opportunity to highlight the biodiversity and the natural resources that are found here in these undeveloped areas along the river, and to help people develop an awareness and appreciation and understanding of what that means, how it contributes to the other resources we have here, to water quality. So it's we're hoping to make this a biannual event, but this will be the first year for it. And we may be looking to encourage more participation from different groups to potentially sponsor or participate in it. So.
Great. Well, before I open it up for public comment, I want to thank Isaac, our videographer tonight, for recording this, because communication is a necessity in this way, that we can refer back to the presentation tonight, and tell your friends and colleagues and other neighbors to tune in as well, since it's going to be on YouTube and Vimeo. So I thank you very much. And now any kind of public comment I'll entertain. Jim.
Just really quick for Don, that at the Bio Blitz, the Norcross property, there's a perfect opportunity there for a Japanese knotweed demonstration project, because there are 4 or 5 little islands of knotweed on the shore that aren't all connected. The other side of the river there is knotweed for a mile up and down the river. So it's still on the Pennsylvania side there. There's still 3 or 4 small contained pieces that I think you could
Yeah.
have someone show. Here's how you can try and
Well,
control it.
it's good to know. Maybe we could incorporate that into it.
Yeah.
And I think it might be also be a good place for Tony to collect some earthworms for his clients.
I don't think that's allowed.
Earthworms.
Helgramized earthworms, that's not allowed anymore, so.
Oh, you can take any earthworms.
Just because you're on camera, that's why.
That's exactly right, Al, because I'm on camera, that's right.
Good thing that's Isaac's here.
Any other public comment? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.